Does the world and universe in which we find ourselves make more sense from an atheistic worldview? This view says life evolved over billions of years, with no intelligence behind it. Or does the evidence lead us to a biblical worldview which says that God created all things, and He was the master engineer that designed everything? Here are 15 lines of evidence that absolutely prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the biblical worldview makes the most sense of the world in which we live. Number 1. Origin of matter. Arguably one of the best scientific laws we have, which is the first law of thermodynamics, indicates you can't get something out of nothing. That fits much better with the biblical narrative, which says that God created matter, than the secular accounts of the Big Bang, which, when pushed, have to admit the original matter, energy, came from nothing. Number 2. Origin of life. We have the law of biogenesis, which states that life only comes from pre-existing life. It's so consistent, we made a law out of it. We've never observed an exception, and science is all about what we can observe. That fits much better with the biblical narrative than the secular accounts of dead chemicals coming together 3.8 billion years ago to form a living cell, which could also reproduce itself. Number 3. Origin of information. Matter and energy do a great job of storing information. The ink and paper in a book or newspaper, the metal and plastic of a computer hard drive. In each case, the physical materials do a great job of storing information, like a breaking news event in the newspaper or Microsoft Office on the hard drive. But in each case, these materials did not create the information. They are simply storing it. In every case, you could always trace the information back to an intelligent source. Similarly with DNA. The physical materials are storing an amazing amount of information, but they did not create that information. That fits much better with the biblical narrative that God spoke the information into existence and used physical materials to store it. This makes more sense than the secular accounts that mutations, DNA copying errors, created all the information we see in the living world. Number 4. Design of life. Evolutionary theory says that the complexity of life we see all happened by random chance, with no intelligence to guide it. Does this fit with what we actually observe? Even the simplest life forms are amazingly complex factories. But beyond that, consider just one complex part of the human body, the brain. How did the human brain, which can think and reason, develop with no intelligent mind to guide the process? This is just one part of a larger central nervous system which integrates with the other systems within the human body. Logic would tell us that it's not possible for something this complex to have developed on its own, with no intelligent mind behind it. Also, consider every other complex life form on the planet. When you look closely, it's easy to see that they were designed by an incredibly intelligent super engineer. Every design had a designer. We know beyond a reasonable doubt that the universe and life is designed. Therefore, the universe and life had a designer. This is called the teleological argument for the existence of God, and this is what the biblical worldview tells us. Number 5. Origin of consciousness. How do atoms, which consist of mainly hydrogen and helium from the Big Bang, interacting over time, become aware of themselves? What is that process? How can atoms that have been moving about undetected by any intelligence gain the ability to understand the origin and operation of all the other atoms in the universe, and eventually be able to make cell phones and play soccer? Number 6. Origin of logic and laws of science. We use logic and science to evaluate worldviews. But hold on, where did logic and the laws come from? Which came first? Stuff, matter and energy, or the non-physical abstract laws that guide and constrain what is possible? One makes no sense without the other. And where did logic come from? It's not a physical thing. We've never seen a physical thing create a non-physical thing. So where did logic come from? Why is it here? Who's to say we need to abide by it? In a secular world, there are no answers. In the biblical narrative, it makes perfect sense, since God is a God of order, and He wants us to be able to have a certain level of understanding of the world He created, and even holds us accountable for it. Number 7. Moral absolutes. If everything is just matter and energy, then there are no moral absolutes. Murder is not wrong, it's just a different choice, and if it helps you survive or simply makes you feel better, Then go for it. In the biblical narrative, we are created in the image of God, and He has instilled in us His moral code. That explains why no matter where you go on the planet, people instinctively know that murder is wrong. Even most murderers would admit it's wrong. Number 8. The geologic record. Virtually every major geologic feature of the Earth can only adequately be accounted for via catastrophic processes, as opposed to slow, gradual forces or changes. What we actually observe is so much more consistent with the catastrophic, worldwide phenomenon called the Genesis flood. Number 9. The fossil record. If Darwinian evolution was an accurate narrative, we should expect to see the simplest life forms at the bottom, ever so slowly transitioning in a gradual continuum to more and more complex life forms as you climb up the geologic column. What do we actually see? We see a sudden explosion of complex life forms in the Cambrian layer, springing out of nowhere, fully functional at the start. Virtually every major phyla is present there, and no new phyla is shown to be developing in the layers above, representing almost 600 million years of supposed evolutionary history. The order we see is mostly a representation of where creatures were living when the flood occurred. Number 10. The existence of love. The question arises, what is love? And where did it come from? Interactions of particles cannot account for love and altruism. Even if you attempt to account for how it developed, there's no reason that any individual or group of individuals should practice or promote it. It should continue to be survival of the fittest, which is what evolutionists say accounts for how we, humans, got here in the first place. Number 11. Origin of male and female. According to evolutionary theory, the first life forms began to asexually reproduce and over time became all that we see today. If this is true, why and how did these organisms, with no intelligence to guide them, create the proper male and female reproductive systems we see in the world? Why would these life forms do this, since asexual reproduction is faster and more efficient? Only the biblical worldview adequately explains the existence of sexual reproduction, with God engineering this intricate system and creating the opposite male and female sexes. Number 12. Origin of language. If molecules to man evolution is true, why are there so many languages? Wouldn't there be one universal language which would greatly help humans survive? If humans evolved language in order to communicate with each other, then why did language continue to evolve in a way that interfered with such communication? The biblical worldview makes more sense as to why we see so many languages in the world. God confused the languages of the earth and dispersed humankind all around the world. Number 13. Origin of species. Along the same lines of the information argument, how do you take a single cell and copy it over and over and gain all the information we find in human beings? Where does all that new information come from, ignoring where the first cell got its to begin with? Mutations are the only game in town to theoretically produce new information, even by the evolutionists' own admission. But to put it mildly, they are woefully inadequate. These supposed mutations would degrade life millions of times faster than they could ever improve something, even on a small, inconsequential scale. Number 14. Evidence for the Bible's authenticity. As you can see, there are many lines of evidence to show that the biblical worldview is the only worldview that makes any sense of the world in which we live. If there is a supernatural being that created everything we see, how do we know this being is the God of the Bible? There are many religions that say there is some type of God. Does this mean all religions are true? Even though most religions have some true beliefs, not all of them can be true because they teach opposite beliefs. So let's look at why the Bible has proven itself to be the only true source of God's revelation to humanity. Its internal consistency. There is no other religious literature that can compare to the Bible. The message conveyed in the Bible is perfectly consistent, despite being written by 40 authors over approximately 2,000 years from 3 continents. The clear focus of its words is on Christ, whose death on the cross was planned by God, the real author of the Bible. Its historical accuracy. Compared to other ancient books, the Bible has shown to be the most historically and archaeologically accurate. It has undergone the most detailed scientific textual study that humanity is capable of, and it has been demonstrated to be entirely authentic. Its prophetic accuracy. The Bible is the only book that accurately predicts specific events, years or even centuries before they happen. This makes it unique among all books ever written. In the Bible, there are about 2,500 prophecies. About 2,000 of them have already come true exactly as written, with no mistakes. The other 500 are currently unfolding in real time. It's scientific foreknowledge. There are many scientific facts described in the Bible which the authors could not have known. This is evidence that the writers were inspired by God to write the text, as there would be no other explanation as to how they could have understood scientific principles before they were discovered. Number 15. The resurrection of Jesus. As you do your research, it becomes clear that there is no other book like the Bible. But to confirm that the Bible is indeed God's word, we have an event in history that forever seals this fact. That is the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. The fact that Jesus Christ not only walked this earth, was crucified and rose from the dead is a confirmation that what God said in his word is true. The resurrection is a fact of history and has been corroborated by the honest testimony of the witnesses, the conversion of skeptics, the fact that Jesus' tomb was empty and that has never been debunked, the fact that the belief in the resurrection grew in the face of intense persecution. Plus, there is plenty of external evidence outside of the Bible to show that the resurrection actually took place. The resurrection of Jesus proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Bible is the only true inspired word to humankind. There you have it, 15 indisputable lines of evidence to show that the biblical worldview is the truth. One line of evidence may be a fluke, but more than 15 and growing? This is no fluke. When you put all of these lines of evidence together, the conclusion points to one inescapable fact. The God of the Bible exists, and the biblical worldview is the truth. To get more details about each, see the links below this video and watch the other videos in our series. If you want to learn more about the lines of evidence that prove the biblical worldview, please visit linesofevidence.com.